In Washington, D.C., they talk about trade in billions of dollars. In 2024, they talk about over $900 billion in trade with our oldest partner, Canada. They talk about geopolitical leverage. They talk about balance of power and national security. Those are big, abstract numbers, debated in air-conditioned offices. But that $900 billion number means nothing to a farmer in Iowa, staring at a $50,000 repair bill for a tractor he needs for harvest. It means nothing to a third-generation auto worker in Michigan who just learned his shift is being cut because of a supply chain disruption he can't control. This isn't a report about statistics. This is a story about the cost, the real human cost of a trade war paid by the people far from the headlines. Today, we are going to follow the path of a single tariff. We will trace it from a signature on a desk in Washington to the price of steel in Illinois, to a lost soybean contract in Nebraska, and ultimately to your job security. Because the cost of this trade war isn't being paid by the politicians, it's being paid by the American farmer and the American factory worker. The chain reaction, the tariff trap. To understand the real cost, we first have to understand how a tariff actually works. It's simple. Think of a tariff as a new, unexpected toll booth built overnight on a highway you've been driving for free for 20 years. This creates two chain reactions. The first is the import cost. When the 25% steel tariff shock hit in 2018, it sent a shockwave through the economy. It meant that American manufacturers, companies like John Deere, Caterpillar, and Ford, suddenly had to pay 25% more for one of their most basic raw materials. What do? They pass that cost directly to you. The second chain reaction is the retaliation cost. When you build a toll booth, your neighbor builds one right back. Canada and Mexico immediately retaliated. They didn't target steel, they targeted you. They applied their own 25% tariffs on the most iconic American products: Wisconsin cheese, Iowa pork, American-made washing machines. This meant your international customers suddenly had to pay 25% more for your product. What did? They stopped buying. They went to Brazil, they went to Argentina. And this is the most important part of the story. Even though those tariffs were largely lifted in May of 2019 to pass the new USMCA trade deal, the damage was already done. The toll booths were gone, but the highway was already broken. It was a perfect trap. Your input costs went up. Your export markets vanished. The American heartland was caught in the middle, the American farmer. To understand this, let's go to Iowa. Let's talk to a fifth-generation corn and soybean farmer. For decades, his business model was built on two things: stable costs and open markets. The trade war attacked both. First, it attacked his input costs. Farming is a steel-intensive business. Tractors, combines, grain bins, seeders, all of it is made of steel. When the 25% steel tariff hit, American manufacturers were forced to pay more, and they did not absorb that cost. Look at John Deere, an American icon. During their earnings calls, John Deere reported to its investors that its steel and raw material costs had risen by over $250 million as a direct consequence of the trade war. That money came from somewhere. It came from the farmers. The price of a new SC Series combined harvester jumped by tens of thousands of dollars. But here is the part most reports miss. The real grinding pain for most farmers wasn't just in buying new equipment, it was in repairing the old. That same tariff applied to replacement parts. The cost of specialized steel components, the parts you need to keep a 15-year-old tractor running through harvest, those prices skyrocketed. That $50,000 repair bill we talked about, that is the real cost of the steel tariff. It's the price of just trying to stay in business. Then the crisis hit his other input cost, fertilizer. Many of the most critical fertilizer components, especially potash, are imported from Canada. Any disruption, any tension, any new barrier at the border, it adds cost. And those costs are passed directly to the farmer. So the farmer's bleeding money just to get his seeds in the ground. But the trade war wasn't done. It then came for his output market. This is the part of the story that is permanent. For years, China was the #1 undisputed customer for the American soybean farmer. When the retaliatory tariffs hit, China looked elsewhere. According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, in that first devastating year of the trade war, American soybean exports to China plummeted by 74%. In some peak months, the drop was 98%. The government tried to help. They offered subsidy payments. But farmers don't want a government check. They want a customer. And China did not wait. Beijing signed new long-term trade agreements with Brazil and Argentina. That market did not come back. As of 2024, Brazil has permanently replaced the United States as the dominant soybean supplier to China. Think about that. To win a temporary fight over steel, we permanently lost our single biggest customer for soybeans. And it wasn't just China. When Canada and Mexico retaliated, they targeted American dairy and pork. According to the Farm Bureau, the retaliatory tariffs from just Canada and Mexico cost U.S. dairy farmers billions in lost sales. It cost pork producers from Iowa and North Carolina an estimated $12 per animal. When you talk to these farmers today, you don't hear anger about geopolitics. You hear a quiet, steady fear. A fear of losing a farm that their family has built over generations. They feel like forgotten soldiers, left on the battlefield of a trade war they never asked to fight. The auto worker, the Seven Crossing crisis. Now let's drive from the cornfields of Iowa to the factory towns of Michigan, the heart of the American auto industry. If the trade war was a hammer blow to the American farmer, it was a grenade thrown into a perfectly tuned machine for the American auto worker. To understand this, you have to understand a concept called the North American factory. The US, Canada, and Mexico don't just trade cars, they build cars together. According to the Center for Automotive Research, a car assembled in America can contain up to 40% of its parts made in Canada and Mexico. That single fact is why the old NAFTA agreement was so crucial. It allowed parts to flow tariff-free across the borders as if they weren't even there. But here is the truly stunning part. According to a report from the Wilson Center, some of the most critical components, like an engine or a transmission, can cross the US-Canada border 7 or 8 times before that car is finished. This is not a mistake. This is the most efficient supply chain ever created. Let's follow a single component, an engine transmission. 1, aluminum ore is mined in Quebec, Canada. 2, it's shipped tariff-free to a smelter in Ohio. That's crossing number 1. 3, the smelted aluminum is shipped to a casting plant in Ontario to be made into a transmission housing. That's crossing number 2. 4, the housing is shipped to a factory in Michigan where American workers install the high-tech gears and electronics. That's crossing number 3. 5, the finished transmission is then shipped back to Ontario to be mounted onto the engine block. That's crossing number 4. 6, finally, the entire engine assembly is shipped to its final assembly plant in Detroit to be placed in a new Ford F-150. That's crossing number 5. 5 crossings for 1 part. Now imagine that 2018 tariff shock. Imagine applying a 10 or 25% tax at every single one of those crossings. It's called tax stacking. The cost of that single component just exploded. The cost of that American-made truck just became thousands of dollars more expensive than a Toyota Tundra. This is economic self-harm. What was the fallout? First, it was chaos. Production lines in Michigan and Ohio ground to a halt because they were waiting on parts that were stuck at the border or that their suppliers suddenly couldn't afford. Second, it was competition. The tariffs made American-built cars more expensive, which hurt sales. And when sales fall, what gets cut first? It's the overtime shifts in Detroit. It's the night shift in Toledo. It's the temporary contracts that don't get renewed. When a politician in Washington says they are using tariffs to protect American jobs, they are often, in reality, putting those very jobs at risk by breaking the supply chain that created them. The new storm, the 2026 USMCA storm. They told you this all ended in 2019. They told you the new USMCA deal fixed everything. They were wrong. Right now, In the fall of 2025, a new storm is gathering. Washington, Ottawa, and Mexico City are preparing for a new fight. It's called the Mandatory 2026 USMCA Review. It's a clause built into the New Deal that forces all three countries to review and potentially renegotiate the entire agreement. And all the old wounds are being torn open again. The U.S. is once again accusing Canada of violating the new dairy quotas, a fight that puts Wisconsin farmers right back in the crosshairs. Washington is in a separate dispute with both Canada and Mexico over how to interpret the rules for auto parts. That seven-crossing crisis, it's not solved. The 2018 trade war never really ended. It was just frozen. And now the threat of new tariffs, new retaliation, new uncertainty is back. For the auto industry and the farming sector, this uncertainty is poison. You cannot invest millions in a new factory. You cannot hire a new shift. You cannot even buy seed for next spring if you don't know what the rules will be in 6 months. The conclusion. So what is the real cost of a trade war? It is not $900 billion. It is not a statistic on a government report. The real cost is the farm in Nebraska that lost its biggest customer permanently to Brazil. The real cost is the job security of that auto worker in Detroit, who is once again facing layoffs because of a political fight over supply chains. The trade war, sold to us as a high-level geopolitical chess match, was a devastating failure on the ground, and its true price is still being paid by the American farmer and the American factory worker. And now, as the 2026 review gets closer, those same farmers and workers are being put right back on the bargaining table. When you hear politicians in Washington talk about winning a trade war, what is the real cost you are seeing in your own community or on your own farm? Share your story in the comments below. The impact on American farmers is staggering, but it's only half the story. The tariffs have triggered a parallel crisis in another iconic American industry, automotive. In our next investigation, we reveal why a single car part now crosses the border 7 times, and what that means for jobs in Michigan and Ohio. Click the link on your screen to watch that report.